You may be seated. Since the great feast of Pentecost 28 weeks ago, we have walked with Jesus through the countryside and the villages of Galilee and Judea. Using Luke's gospel as our guide, we have heard Jesus talk about God's way of life and show us God's way of love. We have seen him embrace those who are out and reprimand all of those who are in. We have watched him bring sight to the blind, sound to the deaf, calm to the storms, and life to the dead. And this weekend, as we come to the end of the church year, next Sunday is Advent 1, the beginning of the new church year, which is the last Sunday after Pentecost, or what Roman Catholics and Lutherans call the Great Feast of Christ the King. We now join Jesus, who hangs on that wooden cross outside the great city of Jerusalem. His words and actions have finally done him in. The political and religious authorities have heard and seen enough. It is time to shut him up. And crucifying the supposed king alongside some common crooks is the perfect way to silence him. Only Jesus won't be silenced. He has one more thing to say to us, and it is a dandy. It is worth remembering. But before we hear Jesus speak this one last time, I want to share a tale with you that I read in a book one time, and I know I've shared it at like a Disciples of Christ and Community lecture one time, so some of you may know this or read it before. It's written by Max Lucado, who's a really well-known Christian writer that's very accessible to those of us who are more simple of mind. And his little story goes like this. He tells the story about one night a couple of prowlers broke into a department store. And they successfully entered the store. They stayed long enough to do what they wanted to do, and then they took off. What's unusual is what these prowlers did. They took nothing, stole nothing from the store. There was no merchandise gone, nothing removed. The cash registers were untouched. Instead of stealing everything, they just simply went in and changed the cost of everything. The price tags were all swapped. So values were exchanged. The clever pranksters took the tag, off of a really nice, $395, $400 camera, and they stuck it on the $10 box of chocolates. The $5.95 sticker on a paperback is found itself on the face of a flat screen TV. They just went right through the whole store and repriced everything. Well, the next morning, imagine the store opened as usual and customers came in to shop, and for about 10 or 15 minutes it was kind of normal, business as usual, until they started going to the cash register. And they found out that they were getting some, potentially really great bargains or just really being ripped off. Nothing was valued as it should be, till finally an employee figured it out and kind of put everything back. I know it all sounds a little far-fetched, and it is, but I don't think that this is just kind of a make-believe story. We see the same thing happening every day, all around us. We live in a world, after all, with a distorted value system. Someone, I'm afraid, has broken into our lives and exchanged the value of your life and mine. If you're pretty, you're handsome, you're young and thin, you have more value. If you live, with the inability to catch a football or snag a pop fly, you have less value. If you live in the right zip code, you drive the right car, you wear the right clothes, attend the right schools, you have more value. If you're gay, you're transgender, you're black, you're brown, you're dirt poor, or you're simple of mind, you have less value. You get it. The world measures our value on these kind of three primary criteria: our appearance, our performance, and certainly our wealth. And if you don't quite measure up, you find yourself always on the outside looking in, or maybe from the bottom looking up. Where does that leave Guy? Where does that leave Guy? Our homeless neighbor that we all see walking all over the streets of Palm Beach Gardens and Jupiter, pulling his red wagon with his big "Make America Great" signs. A wagon that someone from St. Mark's gave to Guy. Where does that leave the young mom or dad fleeing with their children from Honduras today, or from Syria? Where does that offer someone who isn't brilliant, or who battles addictions, or who is born on the wrong side of Silver Beach Road? Where does that leave the elderly woman who lives alone, or the handicapped man who can't leave the house, or the felon who has been out of jail for years and still can't find a job? Not a whole lot of value in those folks, is there? Until we turn our eyes and our ears back to Jesus, who comes into this world, who comes into your lives to place value where it belongs, to set us straight about what's important, to tell us and to show us that the only value system that matters, the only value system that is true with a capital T, is God's. Wake up. Jesus says to all of us, someone has broken into God's world and just messed everything up. You do have value. Don't ever let anyone tell you differently. You are not cheap or unwanted, less valuable than someone else. No one is junk. You are priceless. And in case we don't believe that, or we don't hear that, or we don't live in that value system, Jesus says to us one last time, hanging between the scum of the earth on a cross that is designed for common criminals who have no value to anyone other than maybe a mom or a dad who's too embarrassed to be seen at the foot of her son or his son's cross. Uncommon criminals, white-collar criminals from privileged backgrounds with influential connections, would never be executed this way. No one with value would be caught dead on Calvary's Hill. This is a place where lost souls with no value go to die. But there hangs Jesus, who always manages to show up in all the wrong places. We avoid the dregs of humanity. Jesus seeks the dregs of humanity. We look the other way. He looks them in the eye. We run from outcasts. Jesus runs toward outcasts with open arms as though finding long-lost friends. And now, among the company Jesus always makes, the central event of the entire Bible takes place where God is being crucified between two faceless and nameless criminals. Would you would you in a million years dream of having such an objectionable story at the heart of our faith? Jesus is obscenely displayed, reviled, mocked, spit at, beaten, naked, covered only in dirt and blood and sweat. No such picture of God has ever been imagined in all of the history of the world's religions. And yet it is amid this scene that God in Christ hears the plea of one who is dying to be valued. Jesus, he says, hanging up there, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Maybe he had seen Jesus a few days loving the lowly. Maybe he had watched Jesus dine with punks and prostitutes, pickpockets and potty mouths. Maybe he had just heard Jesus say, just a bit earlier on that same cross, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. Or maybe not. Maybe he was just desperate enough that he takes a chance on Jesus. Jesus, he says, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus, who is in his own struggle with death, lifts his head, kind of turns his face to this dying man and says in a declaration that some theologians have called the gospel within the gospel, don't worry, I will. Today you are with me, paradise. From now on, Jesus is saying, we are in this together. I will never leave you alone. God's presence is Christ's destiny and home. Jesus will not go to paradise, which just means Jesus will not go back into the very heart of God by himself. He will bring him this one beside him on the cross. And why? Why would Jesus do that? Why in the world does he keep treating these losers so well? I'm working so hard. Why does he promise a criminal, a terrorist, no less, a place of honor at the banquet table? What in the world did this sleazy character ever do to deserve that kind of treatment? And what on earth could he ever do to repay Jesus for such generosity? Nothing. And that's the whole point. It's the whole point of this gospel. This gospel that we hear year in and year out and year in and year out. Even in the final breath, Jesus tells us the way it is supposed to be in this world. Tells us about God's values, about what is most precious and valuable to him. And it's you. It's me. It's every child of every race and nation and color and creed. You don't have to look nice, although you all look nice. You don't have to look nice or perform well to earn God's favor. Your value is inborn. I know it does not make any sense. And I understand that not one of us deserves such love like this. But God's love does not recognize your worth. God's love confers your worth. And God goes to the cross to prove it. So, the next time you're being trampled to death by someone else's ambitions, by someone else's demands, by somebody else's expectations, the next time someone tries to pass you off as some cheap and worthless throwaway, the next time some trickster breaks into your heart when you're not looking and tries to hang a bargain basement price tag on your self-worth, turn to Jesus, who is beside you, gazing with compassion on your suffering and the big old mess that you are inside, and ask the simplest of questions. Jesus, remember me. Don't worry. I got your back. He says, today you will be with me in paradise. And then Jesus takes that pierced hand that opens the gate of paradise, not some far off tomorrow, but he takes your hand today, now, when we're in the company of the one who remembers us and gives us more than we would ever know to ask. A love. That welcomes you home. Home into the very heart of God, whose love for you, for me, is priceless. Amen.